talk about today we are going to talk about variables. What is a conceptual definition of a variable and how we operationalize our variables. So I'll start with the definition of the variables. As we discussed this week, too, a variable is a concept that has the ability to take on more than one traits. So, for example, gender is a variable, so you can have male, female, or non-binary, depending on how you define your gender. Then, sex or sexual orientation and academic performance. These are some of the examples of a variable. So, variables are the things that we measure for our are the concepts that we actually try to examine or explore in our research projects. Variables could be defined are usually defined two ways. Number one, conceptual definition, and number two, operational definition. So conceptual definition basically means how we actually conceptualize or use this a variable in our study. So for example, you may say that you want to determine the relationship between gender and vaccination uptake in your study. You want to determine the relationship between gender and anxiety on a college campus. You want to determine the relationship between gender and social media usage in your study. So gender and social media use in the last example would be two variables, and those are the conceptual definitions of those variables. Now I'll use the gender and social media example for the next for the explanation of concept operational definition too, so you can have a better understanding of these concepts. So uh, now for example, Alexis is doing research on the social media usage on campus, for example, and now she wants to determine what is the relationship between gender and social media usage. Now, gender is a variable that she's conceptually defining here, and social media usage is another conceptually defined variable. Now, when she actually carry out that research project, she will have to operationalize or come up with an operational definition. By operational definition, we mean how does she actually plan to measure or examine the variables in her study. So, for example, the concept of gender can be operationally defined as male, female, or non-binary, or she can ask an open-ended question and let the participant decide what their gender is. So one of the questions on her survey could be, what is your gender? And then the options that people write are the way they basically talk about their gender would be the operational definition of the variable gender. And social media usage could be measured in several ways. So, for example, you can ask questions about how often, questions such as how often do you use social media, what types of social media platform do you use, what types of content do you post on social media, how do you interact with social media, things like those. So the questions that you actually ask to measure the social media usage. So, and that's how we basically operationally define our variable to basically specify what do we actually mean by social media usage, by gender, and how are we going to examine or measure that variable. Now, usually in hypothesis, we have two or more variables in our hypothesis, and the variables are divided into independent variable and dependent variable when we write our hypothesis and research questions. I hope you remember our discussion of independent variables and dependent variables from the last couple of days. So an independent variable is a variable that predicts values in another variable or results in changes in another variable. So, for example, when I say that male or female, the odds of getting HPV vaccine are higher among female students than male students, I am trying to determine relationship between gender and vaccine uptake. So in this example, gender is the independent variable and HPV vaccine uptake is the dependent variable, because we are here assuming that females are more likely to get HPV vaccine. So basically, gender is causing or is resulting in changes in HPV vaccine uptake. So HPV vaccine uptake we assume depends on the gender. So since gender is the predictor variable in this hypothesis, we call it the independent variable, and HPV vaccine uptake, since it is uh, the outcome variable, are the changes in uptake are caused by gender, we call it dependent variable. Now, uh, independent variable. Now, what is a dependent variable? Dependent variable, as I explained earlier, is the outcome variable. So basically, the outcome variable means that something that is where the changes are caused by another variable. So an independent variable depends on or is predicted by another variable. So in this case, HPV vaccine uptake is predicted by gender in the hypothesis that we are discussing. So